Hey guys, tonight we tumble down a dusty olive grove slope into one of the pettiest origin stories in mythology, a tale so full of glittering god ego and ancient pettiness that you'll probably doze off halfway through a divine eye roll. Picture this, a warm afternoon in the Aegean sunlight, flickering across the whitewashed stone, the clink of goblets echoing through a godly wedding reception. You smell roasted lamb-sweetened wine and something faintly smoky like a thunderbolt charging up somewhere nearby. Everything looks perfect. Too perfect. You are not on the guest list, and neither critically is Eris, the goddess of discord. She's the one who shows up anyway, trailing drama like a cloud of cheap perfume. She brings with her a shiny golden apple, not to eat, of course, but to ruin absolutely everything. Carved into its side in smug, curl-perfect script, to the fairest. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing just to the side of the immortal buffet table when the moment happens. The apple lands, not with a bang, but a casual clatter at the feet of three particular goddesses: Hera, queen of Olympus, and wife to Zeus, never not complicated; Athena, goddess of wisdom, war, and being that overachiever; and Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and highly inconvenient crushes. The room freezes. Hades looks up from his olives. Apollo stops tuning his lyre. A centaur chokes a little on his wine. Everyone knows this is bad, but no one wants to say it. Because that apple, it's not a compliment. It's a bomb made of compliments. See, Greek gods don't do humility. They do glittering egos, divine grudges, and decades-long vendettas over minor slights. So when the apple dares to suggest that only one of them is the fairest the goddesses do, the absolutely least surprising thing imaginable, they each assume it's obviously meant for them. Now you're watching the universe break into factions faster than a high school group project. Athena argues logic, Hera demands status, and Aphrodite just flashes her dimples like a nuclear weapon. Zeus, king of the gods, predictably wants no part of this. It's like watching someone slowly back out of a room where a toddler is holding scissors. In his infinite, very lazy wisdom, Zeus declares, "Let Paris decide." Paris. Not the city. The shepherd. Specifically, a shepherd prince of Troy, who's currently doing absolutely nothing to deserve what's about to happen to him. Imagine being a regular guy watching your sheep, thinking vaguely about cheese, and suddenly being told you're judging a celestial beauty pageant. It's like winning a golden ticket to Willy Wonka's factory, except all the candy is rigged and someone's going to declare war afterward. Here's your first sleepy scholarly tidbit. Historians still argue whether Paris really understood what he was agreeing to. Was he a porno player? Just in it for the vibes, no one agrees. The ancient sources waffle more than brunch. Anyway, here comes Hermes, the messenger god trickster and general PR specialist for Olympus, guiding the three goddesses down to earth like a flight attendant with too much personality. The sky splits. There's shimmering mist, and suddenly your sheep are running in every direction. Probably you too, honestly. This is not a normal Tuesday. Now, as Paris stares slightly sunburned and 200% confused, the goddesses begin to circle him like extremely elegant sharks. Each has one pitch, one gift, one bribe, but not yet. First, there's the awkward silence. Paris shifts on his sandals, hoping this is just a dream. Hera lifts an eyebrow that says you'd better choose wisely. Aphrodite smiles like she's already won. Athena flexes her spear just slightly, as if to remind everyone who invented strategy and the flute. It's a setup with no good outcomes. No matter who Paris chooses, he'll offend the other two, and Greek gods do not handle rejection like grown-ups. They handle it with floods and fire and family curses that last centuries. So it's not just a choice, it's a cosmic trap in gold leaf. Here's the fringe fact of the night. Some obscure versions of the myth say Eris didn't just toss the apple, she whispered instructions to it. Like a cursed artifact, the apple wanted to divide. Which makes you wonder, maybe the real trick wasn't the bribe, but the very idea of comparison. You sigh, watching Paris rub his chin like someone who just learned 3 flavors of disaster exist in woman-shaped form. You wish you could tell him to walk away. But then again, if he did, well, then there'd be no Trojan War, no Iliad, no Wooden Horse, no Brad Pitt movie. And you wouldn't have a story to fall asleep to. And anyway, Paris is already leaning forward. He's about to hear the offers. Get comfortable. This is where the real trouble begins. Section 2. You squint up at the skyline and there it is. Mount Olympus perched like a glitter-drenched mountain penthouse with its ever-changing weather and unreliable plumbing. You don't hike to Olympus. You are summoned. Or you accidentally end up there after a thunderstorm and some light existential dread. Now imagine it as a timeshare that no one can escape. The gods live here mostly because nowhere else will tolerate them. It's all polished marble columns and floating furniture, but the vibes are tense. You walk through barefoot because sandals just don't feel respectful here, listening to the arguments echoing off the gold ceilings. Zeus and Hera are mid-spat about loyalty, which is rich considering his hobby list. Ares is sulking in a corner because someone moved his spear rack. Dionysus is trying to host a toga-themed brunch in the middle of all this, and no one's RSVPing. The place runs less like a palace and more like a family reunion where everyone secretly wants to ban everyone else from the group chat. You pass by Artemis and Apollo arguing about whose moonlight playlist is superior. You think about how ancient myth paints these beings as majestic, powerful, divine, and then you actually see them. Immortal, yes. Mature, not even close. There's a smell here too, not bad, just specific. Incense ozone and something faintly fruity like immortality has a lemony aftertaste. The halls shift under your feet, not metaphorically, but literally, because Olympus doesn't obey physics, or time, or decor consistency. One corridor is early Corinthian minimalism, and the next is full disco lounge with flaming sconces. You give up trying to understand. So do most mortals. Hera, at the center of all this, commands attention the way a courtroom judge might if the courtroom were in space and the gavel was a meteor. You'd think being married to Zeus would mellow her out, but actually it's done the opposite. She's the queen of Olympus, the goddess of marriage, and the proud owner of a truly terrifying glare. You don't cross Hera. You don't even jaywalk near Hera. So when Eris's golden apple lands at her feet and someone has the audacity to suggest she might not be the fairest, it's not just a blow to her pride. It's a declaration of war in metaphorical high heels, and she is not the type to brush it off and make a vision board. She's the type to make a plague board. Here's your historical grounding for the night. In many ancient cultures, the idea of divine rulers squabbling like siblings wasn't weird, it was expected. Kings and queens were often considered literal or symbolic children of gods, so their power mirrored Olympus in all its dysfunction. If you ever wondered why royal courts across time seem packed with drama and scandal, look no further than this celestial blueprint. Now back to Olympus, where the 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, Aphrodite, are in full campaign mode. This isn't the first time the gods have fought over something stupid, but this time it's petty, even by their standards. Paris hasn't even made a decision yet, and already alliances are shifting. Thunderheads are forming, and Poseidon is claiming he just wants to stay out of it, while very clearly stirring the pot. Here's a fringe fact that might tickle your sleepy brain. Some old mystery cults believed that Mount Olympus itself wasn't a place, but a kind of energy zone, like divine Wi-Fi. The gods didn't live there in a traditional sense. They just vibed there when they needed to coordinate chaos, which means right now the energy is less divine oversight and more family game night gone nuclear. As you stroll through Olympus's mismatched splendor, you start to notice something. Every god seems to be keeping tabs on the Apple situation. Even the ones who pretend not to care have bets placed. The fates are knitting ominously. Hestia is double-checking the fire exits. Hermes is definitely selling merchandise. And Zeus is ghosting everyone. He's off in the clouds somewhere trying to pretend none of this is happening. He handed the whole problem off to Paris like a hot glowing potato, And now he's doing whatever the king of gods does when he's pretending to be responsible, probably shape-shifting into a goose or seducing a shrub. You know the usual. You pass by a divine calendar carved into marble. It says heroic age day 1 of petty consequences. You think about how many wars started not with strategy, but with bruised egos. This is just the gods doing their version. But down below in the mortal world, this apple is already setting dominoes in motion. Alliances will form, cities will fall. And Paris is still just petting his sheep, completely unaware that his bachelor brain is about to start a decade-long war. Historians still argue whether the entire myth is a metaphor for the collapse of Bronze Age civility or just a warning about what happens when you let your personal bias become public policy. Either way, the moment Hera set her sights on winning that apple, she stopped thinking like a goddess and started acting like a politician, a very, very determined one. And Olympus, it's not handling it well. You hear Hephaestus mutter something about forging a new fairness scale. Aphrodite commissions a mural of herself holding the apple just in case. Athena is writing a dissertation in her head titled On the Failings of Vanity, a Tactical Analysis. Everyone is pretending this is normal. It's not normal. You decide to exit Olympus before the next lightning bolt flies. As you descend through clouds, the squabble echoing behind you, you get the distinct feeling this story is only getting more chaotic. The gods may be immortal, but their patience is painfully human. Section 3. You're back on Earth now, somewhere hilly and sheep-infested, probably near Troy, though the maps are iffy, and GPS hasn't been invented yet. The air is thick with dust and the kind of silence that only exists when a man is about to be tricked into cosmic responsibility. You find Paris lounging beneath an olive tree, looking exactly like someone who peaked in his gap year and never looked back. He's tan-toned and entirely too relaxed for a guy about to trigger 1,000 ships. His sheep graze lazily nearby, oblivious. You swear one of them gives you a look that says, "It's always the good-looking ones." Suddenly, the air shifts cool and sparkly with that unmistakable scent of divine drama. Hermes, gliding down like a PR rep with wings and too much caffeine, taps Paris on the shoulder. "Hey, buddy. Big honor you've been chosen to judge a beauty contest between 3 goddesses." Paris squints mid-cheese bite. "Is there a form I need to sign?" There is not. There is no opt-out. You are now the judge of 3 immortal women who could reduce you to ash with a snap, but are instead going to offer you bribes because they're that desperate for a compliment. You shuffle nervously as Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite materialize in a soft whoosh of light and ego. They pose not like supermodels, more like powerful CEOs about to pitch hostile takeovers. Athena has the poise of someone who's already read your resume and marked it up in red. Aphrodite beams like your crush from 7th grade and your worst ex combined. Hera stands there like the concept of dignity incarnate. Paris gulps audibly. You watch him fumble through a polite greeting, bowing too low, then too stiff, then knocking over a clay jug he wasn't even holding. The goddesses exchange glances. This is going to be even easier than they thought. Aphrodite goes first. She leans in close, voice syrupy smooth. "Choose me, and I'll give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world." Paris's eyes go wide, like, guaranteed, guaranteed. You see the gears grinding in his head. The sheep pause, chewing. Then Athena steps forward. Her voice is calm and sharp, like marble slicing silk. "Choose me, and you'll have wisdom beyond king's strategy, beyond generals. Victory in every battle." Paris pretends to weigh it. That does sound useful. Athena folds her arms. It's literally how civilizations are built. Now comes Hera, and this is where it gets weirdly real. She doesn't flirt. She doesn't promise seduction or honor. Instead, she raises one elegant hand and says with the tone of someone offering a seat on the board, "If you choose me, I will give you dominion over all of Asia and Europe. Powerland influence. Your name will be stamped into history, not as a lover, not as a fighter, but as a ruler. And here, my sleepy friend, is where this myth takes a bureaucratic left turn. Hera's offer is not sexy, it is not poetic, it is logistical. She is promising land rights, and not the kind where you inherit a dusty olive grove. No, she's offering Paris an entire continent or two, depending on how the borders are drawn. You blink. Did she just promise Eurasia? Yes? Yes, she did. This is your mainstream historical fact of the night in the Bronze Age. The concept of land ownership was fuzzy, but territory and control were everything. Kings didn't always own land. They controlled the people who worked it, taxed it, and marched across it in chariots. Hera's offer isn't just property, it's political power, kingdoms, tribute, diplomatic weight, and Paris. Paris hears her out. He nods, strokes his chin, pretends he's deep in thought. But you can tell he's already made up his mind. He's not a land guy. He's not a battle guy. He's a fall in love with someone he shouldn't even look at kind of guy. Still, you have to admire Hera's confidence. She didn't play into Paris's obvious shallow streak. She offered him a grown-up deal, one that came with borders and infrastructure, maybe even a zoning permit. Fringe tidbit time, there's a lesser-known inscription from a later Roman satire suggesting that Hera also offered Paris the ability to annex parts of the sea, literal ocean property rights, which is fascinating and also raises several questions about how that would even work. Like, would he have to patrol the Aegean with a clipboard? But back in the moment, Paris stalls. He looks between them, a war goddess, a queen, a love deity, all waiting, all watching. The sheep shuffle nervously. One lets out a low baa, as if urging Paris to take the land and live a peaceful, boring life of treaties and crop rotation. Historians still argue whether this moment was ever really meant to be fair. Did Zeus actually want Paris to choose, or did he know Paris's preferences and set the whole thing up to ignite a war he secretly wanted? After all, nothing consolidates divine power like a good human catastrophe. You glance at Paris again. He is nodding, smiling, and not at Hera. That's when you realize this isn't just a tale about pride or beauty or politics. It's a cautionary bedtime parable about what happens when you offer someone the keys to civilization and they pick a crush instead. Poor Hera. She played the long game, and she's about to be furious. Section 4, you don't hear thunder, but you feel it, the kind of slow-building, deep-rumbling thunder that starts in the pit of Hera's pride and rolls all the way down Olympus like a grudge in stilettos. Paris has just handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, and somewhere in the background, reality flinches. Hera's eyes narrow by 0.5 millimeter. That's all. No lightning bolts, no earthquake, just a polite little nod and a smile so thin it could shave granite. And that right there is the real problem. You know that thing where someone says, "It's fine," but their aura screams, "You're going to wish you were never born." Yeah, that. Hera takes rejection like a CEO takes a hostile takeover. Gracefully, publicly, with a long, slow exhale. And privately, she starts planning the collapse of your entire family line. Paris, bless him, is still smiling. You want to shake him gently and whisper, "Run, hide, maybe change your name to something less Greek." But he's too busy being dazzled by Aphrodite, who's now fluttering her lashes and pretending she didn't just win this contest like it was a rigged raffle. Athena, meanwhile, storms off in a flash of righteous fury, muttering something about strategic incompetence and the systemic failures of patriarchy. You half expect her to invent feminism and siege warfare in the same afternoon. Back to Hera. She turns away from the meadow with the posture of someone who is absolutely, definitely not going to let this go. You follow her mostly because the air around her is now 10 degrees colder and smells faintly of impending doom. She glides up to Olympus, makes herself a cup of something steaming ambrosia with a twist of resentment, and sits down to plot. This isn't going to be about Paris. Not really. Paris is just the spark. Hera wants to burn the whole haystack. And she knows just where to aim Helen. Ah, yes, Helen of Sparta, the face that will soon launch 1,000 ships, married to Menelaus, king of Sparta, and objectively one of the top 5 worst women to abduct, if you're trying to keep international peace. She's beautiful, bored, and dangerously available to the whims of the gods. Because here's your historical fact of the night in ancient Greek culture: women like Helen weren't just characters, they were symbols. Land, power, glory, all wrapped up in one extremely high-maintenance package. Marrying a woman like Helen wasn't about romance, it was political currency with really nice cheekbones. So when Aphrodite fulfills her promise and makes Helen fall in love with Paris, it's not just scandalous, it's a diplomatic nuclear bomb. And Hera. Oh, she sees the explosion coming a mile away and smiles that icy little smile again. Fringe detail, some obscure versions of the myth say Helen wasn't even real, that what Paris took was a phantom conjured by the gods, while the real Helen was spirited away to Egypt for safekeeping. Historians still argue whether this was ancient authors trying to spare Helen's reputation, or just covering for the fact that nobody could agree on where she actually was during the war. Either way, Hera doesn't care. Real or phantom, the insult is real and the fallout is hers to direct. She starts weaving her influence like it's embroidery class on hard mode, whispering to kings, nudging oracles, fanning the flames of honor and retribution. Because Hera knows something. Paris doesn't. You don't need to fight someone to ruin them. You just have to make everyone else want to. She slides into the background of diplomacy, letting Menelaus stomp around like a red-faced bull while she steers the storm clouds behind the scenes. It's not revenge, it's justice. Hera-style elegant, excessive, and entirely irreversible. Meanwhile, Paris has made it to Troy Helen at his side, and everyone's pretending this is fine. Priam the king offers an awkward welcome, clearly wondering how this Greek love interest became a house guest. Hector, Paris's brother and actual competent adult, says nothing, but sharpens his sword very pointedly at dinner. And back in Sparta, Menelaus is not taking it well. You sit in on the council meeting where the Greeks Agamemnon, Odysseus, Nestor, a few other guys with suspiciously dramatic facial hair are discussing options, which in ancient Greece means war. Always war. They don't do mediation, they barely do conversation. You lean against a column watching Agamemnon get riled up and think, wow, this entire conflict is about pride and property, and a woman, and an apple. And none of this needed to happen, but Hera needed it to. She didn't win the apple, so no one wins. Not Paris, not Helen, not Troy. Hera isn't just rejecting rejection, she's rejecting the entire premise of being judged by mortals. You start to realize the apple wasn't about beauty. It was a test of power, and Paris failed it. You can't help but wonder, what if he'd picked Hera? Would there be no war? No wooden horse? No epic poems shouted over campfires? Or would something else have gone wrong? Because the gods, as a rule, do not do happy endings. Historians still debate whether this myth was meant to reflect actual political tensions between Eastern and Western city-states, or just an elaborate cautionary tale about what happens when you mix desire with divine politics. Either way, it's working. You're already exhausted, and the war hasn't even started. You glance one last time at Hera, seated high above it all, sipping her drink with the smug tranquility of someone who just dropped a lit match into a hay bale and walked away. She's not just offended, she's activated. Section 5. You settle deeper into your blanket of twilight, the sleepy hum of inevitability in your ears. Down below, war drums haven't started yet, but their rhythm is coming. Slow, relentless, like a yawn before a stampede. Hera's slighted ego now echoes through kingdoms, and Paris is sipping honeyed wine on a balcony, somehow still unaware that the entire geopolitical structure of the Aegean is curling into a fist. The real trouble kicks off at the Greek War Council, this weird hybrid of tactical planning and insecure masculinity. You're there lounging on a stone bench with olives in hand, watching Agamemnon try to out-macho Odysseus. It's like an early prototype of a fraternity meeting, but with more facial scars and fewer boundaries. They're not subtle. They want Helen back. Or, well, they want Troy. Helen is the pretext. Her abduction is the emotional frosting on a political cake that's already been baking for years. Here's your historical fact. Ancient Troy, located in modern-day Turkey, sat in a crucial trade position. Control over the Dardanelles meant controlling access between the Aegean and the Black Sea, big deal for merchants and warlords alike. So while this myth pretends to be about romance, it smells strongly of tariffs and territorial ambition. The leaders of Greece don't just want revenge. They want a shipping monopoly. Still, they can't exactly say, let's go to war for trade. So instead they gather all the old suitors of Helen, remember they'd each pledged an oath to defend her marriage, and guilt-trip them into assembling an army. Odysseus tries to fake insanity to avoid going. He literally yokes a donkey and an ox together and starts ploughing a beach with salt. They're onto him instantly. Next comes Achilles. He's technically a teenager hiding in drag on an island full of women, which you assume was someone else's terrible idea of witness protection. They drag him out, hand him armor, and tell him he's the chosen one. His mother Thetis is not pleased. Thetis, a sea nymph with strong opinions and a habit of bending fate, dips Achilles into the river Styx to make him invulnerable except for the heel she holds him by. Yes, the famous Achilles heel. Literal weak spot. It's like installing a home security system and leaving the front door wide open. Anyway, the Greeks gather. Ships are built, spears are sharpened, sandals are strapped. And all the while, Hera is whispering into ears, nudging strategies, making sure the war happens just right. You'd think this would make her the villain, but no. She's more like an over-involved executive producer. She wants the show to go on because she wasn't cast as the lead. Fringe tidbit of the night, one ancient fragment suggests Hera sabotaged some of the Greek supply lines early on, just to delay the launch, allegedly to give herself time to sew a new battle banner. It had "Hera was right," stitched in gold thread. The fragment is probably satire. Probably. Meanwhile, back in Troy, everyone's doing their best to pretend this won't be a problem. Paris parades Helen through the city like she's a trophy from a raffle he definitely didn't earn. The Trojans aren't thrilled. Priam tolerates it. Hector grits his teeth so hard you can hear it echo off the palace walls. Helen, for her part, may or may not be enchanted. That's still up for debate. She says she loves Paris, but there's a hollow edge to it, like someone smiling at a wedding they don't remember agreeing to. Historians still argue whether Helen had any agency in this story at all. Some say she ran off willingly. Others claim Aphrodite cursed her into infatuation. Still others point to later plays, where Helen seems angry, trapped and emotionally numb, as if she woke up mid-episode of mythological mistakes the home-wrecking years. Either way, no one asks what she wants now. You trail the camera as she walks Troy's walls, staring out at the sea, where the horizon is about to be thick with sails. You imagine her whispering, "Is this what love looks like?" Then one morning the sun rises and turns the Aegean silver. You squint. At first it looks like a shimmer. Then shapes. Then thousands of ships. Like teeth on a monstrous comb, they glide toward shore. The Greeks have arrived. You'd expect panic. Instead, you get protocol. Trumpets. Orders. A surprising amount of heroic posing. On Olympus, the gods gather for snacks and mayhem. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon take their seats on Team Greece. Aphrodite joins Ares on Team Troy, mostly to protect her investment in Paris. Zeus, as usual, claims neutrality, but keeps glancing toward the humans, like he's watching a really well-written soap opera. The war won't start with full violence yet. No first-come speeches, envoys, the ceremonial denial of diplomacy. You follow a herald as he reads Menelaus's demand, "Return my wife and avoid ruin." Priam declines. Politely. With regret. The herald leaves. Silence falls. Somewhere a bird chirps and reconsiders its choices. And just like that, the path is set. No more bargaining. No more illusions. You're standing at the cliff edge of history, where myth begins to blur into memory, and everyone starts pretending this was always inevitable. The sand beneath your feet vibrates with the anticipation of blood and glory. The gods above settle into their cosmic box seats, and Hera sips from her golden cup, eyes gleaming. This isn't revenge anymore. This is art. Section 6. So here you are caught between history and myth, ankle deep in sand that's about to be churned by decades of war boots. The beach glows with dawn deceptively peaceful, as if the universe is holding its breath before the punchline of a very long, very unfunny joke. You smell salt, pine from the ships, and something else, ambition. Sharp metallic, like someone polished their ego and sprayed it with olive oil cologne. The Greek army pours out like ants from a kicked anthill. Shields glint, banners flap. Achilles appears his hair too fabulous for this much aggression. Odysseus mutters something tactical. Agamemnon puffs out his chest like a rooster made entirely of insecurity and war crimes. And Hera. She watches from the clouds calm as ever, like a woman who just found out her ex's house is about to be flattened and she's already making popcorn. The first move isn't made with a sword, it's made with a tantrum. Achilles refuses to fight. Yes, the Achilles, the hero, the chosen one, the man dipped in destiny, throws a whole fit because Agamemnon, in a move so predictably toxic it should come with a warning label, steals Achilles' war prize, Briseis, a Trojan woman, given to him like she's a medal instead of a human. Achilles sulks in his tent. And this isn't just some passive-aggressive, I'm not talking to you moment. No, he refuses to participate in the war, leaving the Greeks without their MVP. Historical side note. Briseis might have been based on real war captives, women taken as spoils traded like property. This myth filters the practice through a dramatic lens, but the core reflects the grim reality of ancient warfare. So while Achilles practices his brooding, the Greeks start getting absolutely thrashed. The Trojans, led by Hector cool, head-sharp blade, 1 foot always rooted in, why am I the only adult here, begin driving them back toward the sea. And here's the fringe detail of the night. Some older fragments suggest Hector secretly hoped Paris would fix this diplomatically, or at least duel Menelaus and end things early. But no. Paris is too busy playing lover-boy-in-chief, serenading Helen with lyre music and suspiciously modern poetry, like Shall I Compare Thee to a Minor Naval Treaty? Historians still debate whether Achilles' withdrawal from battle was meant to reflect the dangers of unchecked pride or a warning about the fragile egos of elite warriors. Either way, it leads to disaster after disaster on the Greek side, while Hera fumes that her team's best piece is benched. So what does she do? She cheats. Politely, strategically. With that same passive-aggressive flair only a queen of Olympus could pull off. She marches up to Zeus and turns on the charm, starts flattering him, laughs at jokes he hasn't made, pours wine like a diplomat at a very awkward dinner party, all while he sits on his throne thinking, why is my wife being nice? Then she breaks out the big guns, the belt of Aphrodite. Yes, it's real, a magical accessory that makes its wearer utterly irresistible. Not metaphorically, literally. It's like giving someone a temporary cheat code for seduction. So picture this, Hera in full goddess glam walks into Zeus's presence, wearing that belt, gives him a look that could melt glaciers, and suggests they take a quick nap on Mount Ida. He says yes before finishing his ambrosia, and while Zeus is knocked out cold in post-romantic stupor, because gods apparently pass out afterward like bored teenagers, Hera slips away and makes her move. She sends divine help to the Greeks, tilts the battlefield subtly back in their favor, and for a few brief hours, Team Greece actually gets its act together. Poseidon joins her trident in hand, probably thinking, finally, something entertaining. Together, they push back Trojan forces, restore morale, and give Agamemnon just enough confidence to deliver one of his motivational speeches, which, to be clear, are mostly yelling and eye contact. You're sitting on a ridge now, overlooking the chaos, and it strikes you how personal this all is. Not just to Hera, but to everyone involved. This isn't strategy. This is an ancient version of petty office drama scaled up to mythic proportions, with blood. And at the center of it is still that apple, that golden insult, that tiny shining emblem of ego. You wonder if Hera thinks about it every time she pulls a string, if she sees Paris in her mind and thinks, you could have said my name. But he didn't. And now thousands of people are dying. The gods, by the way, are treating this war like reality TV. They're constantly switching sides, arguing over dinner, and making bets behind each other's backs. One minute, Apollo's blessing, Trojan arrows. The next, Athena's deflecting them mid-air like it's dodgeball. Even Hermes pops in occasionally to deliver messages and snack on someone's rations. Hera, though, stays locked in, eyes on Troy, fingers poised. Every setback is a chance to adjust. Every Greek loss is a quiet burn in her pride. This isn't just about winning, it's about proving a point. She's not here for fairness. She's here for vengeance wrapped in divine micromanagement. And while Zeus eventually wakes up and realizes what's happened, it's too late. The Greeks have gained momentum. Achilles, still brooding, hears of their small successes and starts sharpening his spear again. You can feel it, his return is coming. But not yet, because first something even more devastating has to happen. Someone important has to die. Someone who matters to Achilles. And Hera, ever the conductor of chaos, is patiently waiting for the music to swell. Section 7, the wind off the sea shifts. Salt and smoke twist together in the air, and the soundscape changes, less shouting, more weeping, more steel hitting bone. Hera watches, unblinking. She knows what's coming. You do too now. You walk with Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion. Some say his cousin, others insist his lover, some say both, some argue neither. Historians still argue whether their bond was romantic brotherly or a blend of both tangled in the language of ancient hero worship. But what no one debates is this Patroclus is Achilles' heart outside his body, and that heart is about to go walking into fire. Achilles still refuses to fight. He's dug in like a moody demigod burrito, wrapped in blankets of pride. The Greeks are getting crushed again. Morale is lower than a sea snail's self-esteem. The Trojans are at the ships burning them, and Hera, she's furious. All her careful string-pulling is unraveling thanks to Achilles' personal theatre production titled I Deserve an Apology. So Hera pivots. She whispers into the dream of a Greek healer, nudges a plan forward. The message trickles to Patroclus like water soaking into sand. Wear Achilles' armor. Scare them. Be a symbol. And it works. Oh, it works too well. Patroclus rides out looking exactly like Achilles' helmet, shield, everything but the ego. He fights with a ferocity that stuns the Trojans. For a moment the tide turns. The Greeks rally. Hope blooms. But here's your historical detail. In Bronze Age, warfare armor was often personalized. That's not just a dramatic flourish. Leaders really did have distinct gear that made them easy to spot. It made commanding troops easier, but also made you a walking target. And so Hector sees Achilles, except it's not. And Hector, protector of Troy, prince and soldier, sees his duty clearly. He kills Patroclus. The moment is sharp as flint. One breath he's alive, the next he's sprawled in the dust blood soaking the armor that doesn't belong to him. And Achilles. When the news reaches him, it's like the earth stops spinning. He doesn't scream. He erupts. You're standing there as he kneels beside the body, trembling not with grief, but with fury so white-hot it silences every bird in a 3-mile radius. He tears at his hair, vows revenge, swears he'll kill Hector, even if it means dying soon after. You know the war just changed hands, from politics to poetry, from strategy to myth. And Hera, oh Hera, smiles. Not because she enjoys the death, but because Achilles is moving again. Her piece is back on the board, and better yet, angry. Fringe tidbit. A lesser-known tradition claims Hera briefly disguised herself as a mourning woman and stood among the Greeks at Patroclus's funeral pyre just to soak in the weight of the tragedy. Was it real, a metaphor, or just some ancient fan fiction preserved in papyrus? Hard to say. But it tells you something about how invested she is. The funeral itself is a bonfire of sorrow. Achilles organizes funeral games, wrestling chariot races. Javelin throws all in Patroclus's honor. Everyone competes like the gods are watching. Because, well, they are. And as the flames rise, Achilles swears one more oath: Hector will die, and his body will be dishonored. Now this is where it gets cruel. Achilles goes full rage mode. He slaughters Trojans like it's a sport. And when he finally finds Hector, it isn't a duel, it's a reckoning. They clash beneath the walls of Troy. Hector pleads for his body to be returned if he dies. Achilles refuses. When he kills Hector, and he does, it's so final, so fierce, that even the gods flinch. Then he ties Hector's body to his chariot and drags it around the city walls. Not once, not twice, every day for days. This, you feel, is where Hera's influence curdles, because even she begins to shift in her seat. Her hand still moves the pieces, but a sourness creeps in. She didn't ask for this. She wanted the Greeks to win, not dissolve into monsters. She wanted Paris punished, not Hector desecrated. Even the gods start to complain. Apollo, who favored Hector, demands the body be returned. Zeus listens. He sends Thetis, Achilles' mom, to talk some sense into her son. Hera remains silent, but she watches, always watching. Priam, king of Troy, sneaks into the Greek camp under divine escort. He kneels before the man who murdered his son and begs for the body. And Achilles, who deep down remembers he's human, breaks. He weeps. He gives Hector back. In that moment, the rage cools. You sit beside Hera up among the clouds. She doesn't speak, but you notice she's no longer smiling. Maybe this wasn't the story she wanted. Maybe when she bribed Paris all those years ago, she thought it would be cleaner, more dignified, less soaked in smoke and screams. Historians still debate whether the moral arc of the Trojan War was always meant to show the decay of heroes, or whether it just became that once the gods overplayed their hands. Either way, you feel the tide shifting again. The war is not over. Not yet. But something has changed. And Hera folds her hands. Waits. Because the wooden horse is still to come. Section 8. The war simmers. Then simmers lower, like a pot forgotten on a dying fire. You hear fewer horns now, fewer speeches. The Trojans bury Hector with gold and tears, and for a breath, a single short breath, Troy is quiet. But Hera isn't. She's planning again. You know that look by now. Eyes narrowed, one finger tapping the arm of her throne, always watching, always remembering the insult. Paris still lives. That fact alone must be like chewing a lemon rind to her. You drift through the Greek camp. Achilles is quieter these days, as if part of him died with Patroclus and never came back. The fire in his eyes doesn't burn, it flickers like a candle in a drafty temple. He fights less now, talks less, sleeps even less, and Hera from above watches his weariness settle like dust. You'd think this would be the moment the gods pull back, let mortals handle the rest. But no, this is the part where everything starts getting weird, like myth-level weird. Enter the Amazons. Yes, the legendary warrior women, led by Penthesilea, queen-daughter of Ares, and according to some ancient footnotes, a tragic case of divine misdirection. Some say she came to Troy to help the Trojans out of loyalty. Others say she just wanted to die honorably in battle after accidentally killing her sister while hunting. Either way, she arrives sword first. Achilles meets her in combat. The fight is swift and brutal, and if you believe the poets, ends with Achilles falling in love with her just as she dies. Fringe tradition even claims he mourned her deeply, another strange twist in a man who leaves as many tears behind him as corpses. Hera, silent. You get the sense she sees these side quests as distractions, detours. She wants the war to end, but her way? And Paris still lives. And then finally the gods take matters further. Enter Paris's death. Let's pause here for a historical note. Paris, the pretty boy prince who caused all this, has no real battlefield reputation. In Homer's version, he's more archer than warrior, flashier than useful. In real Bronze Age terms, his character might be a stand-in for entire noble classes who caused wars but never fought in them. Food for thought, right? Anyway, Paris gets wounded by Philoctetes, an archer who's been chilling on a nearby island with a snake-bitten foot and Heracles' actual bow. Yes, that Heracles, demigod, lion wrestler, all-around overachiever. Paris staggers, bleeding, dying. He drags himself to his first love, the nymph Ononi, begging her to heal him. She says no. You don't blame her. So Paris dies alone. Hera finally allows herself to exhale. The boy who judged her, who chose Aphrodite and Helen and started this chain of gods and kings is dead. And yet, the war still drags on. The gods bicker. The Greeks squabble. The Trojans hunker behind their great walls, clinging to hope like ivy on stone. Historians still debate whether the Trojan War reflects a real historical conflict, some late Bronze Age battle between Mycenaean Greeks and the people of a city near modern-day Hisarlik in Turkey. Archaeology hints at layers of fire, of rebuilding, but whether there was a real Paris, a real Hector, a real wooden horse, no one knows. Maybe that's the point. Still, you walk the walls of Troy, you hear children cry, you feel Hera's dissatisfaction roll like thunder. She wanted a clean victory. She got this tangled net of death and half wins. So what does she do? She backs the greatest con in Greek myth. Odysseus steps forward, clever, cunning, probably invented sarcasm. He proposes a trick. You feel the mood change in the heavens. Hera leans forward. Athena perks up like a cat hearing a can opener. Even Poseidon, who's been napping in a wine vat, opens one eye. A horse, not a gift, a weapon. The plan: build an enormous wooden horse big enough to house elite Greek soldiers inside. Leave it outside Troy's gates. Pretend to retreat. Let the Trojans drag it in, believing it a peace offering, a surrender trophy. Classic nothing suspicious about this move. And the best part, the Trojans fall for it. Some say it's Athena who clouds their minds. Others say Poseidon shakes the ground until doubt crumbles. But you feel Hera's fingerprints here too. She doesn't speak, doesn't interfere, but she allows it, encourages it. After all these years, she doesn't want a fair fight. She wants an end. One last quirky detail for tonight. Ancient writers couldn't agree whether the horse was made of cypress pine or olive wood. A few fringe versions even describe it as gold-plated, which seems impractical for stealth, but sure, let's go with it. And so the Greeks vanish, at least appear to vanish, sailing out just far enough to be seen disappearing over the horizon. The Trojans, hearts full of relief, pull the horse into the city. They hold a feast, they sing, and Hera. She waits for nightfall, because this finally is the moment she's been promised. Section 9. Night falls like a curtain drawn too slowly. Troy, at long last, is quiet. Not the anxious silence of a siege, but the warm hush of celebration of disbelief. You wander its streets now lamplit and wine-soaked, weaving through clusters of people who can't believe it's finally over. They sing, they laugh, some weep with joy. The horse stands in the main square, towering and wooden and odd. You, of course, know better. Up above, Hera leans forward. Her eyes are locked on the gates, on the courtyards, on the bonfires flickering like old stars. She doesn't speak, doesn't breathe. She's waited too long for this. You can smell it too, the dry scent of wood, of torch smoke, of poor choices. Down below, a priest named Laocoon senses something is wrong. He pleads with the Trojans to burn the horse. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts, he warns, in what will later become the world's most quoted red flag. And here comes your fringe tidbit of the night. Some versions say Hera personally sends the sea serpents that kill Laocoon and his sons, tangling them like ribbon-wrapped regrets right there in front of the temple. Other versions blame Poseidon. Either way, his death conveniently shuts down the last voice of reason in the city. Historians still argue whether Laocoon was a real priest who tried to stop a real trick, or if he was later inserted into the myth to warn audiences about ignoring inconvenient truths. Classic scapegoat energy. The Trojans, seeing the serpents as punishment for doubting the horse, shrug, drink more wine and party harder. And that, kids, is why magical realism and poor decision-making never mix. Midnight deepens. The stars wheel above in that slow, lazy spin they do when no one is watching. You perch somewhere near the horse's massive legs, feeling the buzz die down into a softer hum. Even the laughter fades. Just crickets now. Crickets and the occasional dropped goblet. Then creak. A panel in the belly of the beast slides open. Out come the Greeks. Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus, and others whose names you'd recognize if you squinted at a dusty museum placard. They descend silently, knives drawn breath-held. They signal. At sea, the Greek fleet turns back sails like shadows racing toward shore. And Hera, she doesn't cheer. She doesn't gloat. She just watches. Her vengeance is finally unfolding, slow as honey, sharp as ash. The soldiers fan out. Gates are opened. Fires are lit. And Troy, oh Troy, wakes up to screaming. You follow the flames as they snake through alleyways, turning stone red and sky orange. People stumble from beds into nightmares. The temples fall. The markets collapse. Children cry out. Mothers drag sons. The city that stood proud for 10 years falls in one night. Achilles is dead, yes, shot through the heel by Paris before Paris died. But his son Neoptolemus is here now, young, brutal, and eager to make a name. You see him storm the palace, sword dripping. He kills King Priam at the altar of Zeus, a crime that even Hera raises a divine eyebrow at. Because this wasn't part of the deal. This is ugly. The gods watch in awkward silence as lines are crossed again and again. Cassandra, cursed prophetess no one ever believes, is dragged from the temple of Athena, screaming. The statue of the goddess topples. And somewhere inside the smoke, Hera realizes this has gone too far. But it's too late now. The Greeks are in. Troy is finished. The wooden horse stands in the center of the destruction, quiet and smug. Here's your historical note. Scholars believe the horse may have been a metaphor, possibly a siege engine, a battering ram, or even an earthquake that allowed the Greeks in. Others think it's just a clever myth about trickery. Still, the wooden horse has become the symbol of betrayal. Trojans, malware, you name it. By morning, the sun rises over rubble. The survivors are few. Hera, high above, finally breathes. A long, measured breath. Her promise is fulfilled. Paris is dead. Troy has paid the price. And yet, you sense it, don't you? That thin thread of regret tugging at her. She didn't want this. Not this. Because vengeance is like fire. It burns everything. And when it's over, all that's left is the smoke and the echo of things you can't undo. You find Helen standing on the beach, wrapped in a cloak, her face unreadable. Menelaus approaches. He lifts her chin. Some say he forgave her. Some say he tried to kill her and was stopped. Historians still argue which version is older, which version is true. Maybe neither, maybe both. Helen goes home, and the war at long last is over. Or so everyone thinks, but Hera knows better. Because Odysseus still has to get home, and the gods are far from done playing. Section 10. The beach is littered with footprints and ashes, and the sea laps indifferently at the wreckage. You stand there a while trying to feel triumphant. You really try, but mostly it just feels quiet, too quiet. The Greeks start packing up, thinking it's time to go home. Time to slide back into their old lives like they're slipping on worn sandals. Some weep, some cheer, some Odysseus included look wary like they know better. And Hera. She finally turns her gaze away from Troy. But not for peace. No, she's scanning the returning armies like a professor marking up a very disappointing group project. Troy fell, yes, but not with the dignity she wanted. Not with the elegance. Too many mortals got messy. Too many gods got greedy. She turns her eye to Odysseus, king of Ithaca. Clever, slick-tongued master of schemes, the one who really made the horse work. And for reasons best, left cloudy jealousy pride, some minor snub you weren't paying attention to, she lets Poseidon take over. Now for the historical fact, the Odyssey attributed to Homer picks up here. It's not just a sequel, it's a reckoning. It's about what happens after the war, when there's nothing left to burn but yourself. So Odysseus sets sail. and Hera sits back to watch. The sea is wide. Odysseus's ship is small. He thinks maybe he'll be home in a few weeks. It takes him 10 years. You float above the water, gliding alongside him, as one misfortune after another knocks him off course. First up, the Cicones. He raids them, then lingers too long, and gets driven back with casualties. Not exactly a glorious start. Then comes the land of the Lotus Eaters, basically the ancient Greek version of a resort town with dangerously good edibles. His crew eats the lotus flowers, forgets they ever wanted to go home, and starts vibing barefoot in the sand. Odysseus has to drag them back by force. Some say Hera inspired the lotus haze, adding a few extra petals to the mix. Maybe. You wouldn't put it past her. You feel the mood shift when they reach the island of the Cyclopes. And yes, that means Polyphemus, giant, one-eyed, sheep-hoarding son of Poseidon. You know this story. Odysseus, in a move both brilliant and ridiculous, tells Polyphemus his name is nobody. Then he blinds the giant and escapes with his crew by clinging to the bellies of sheep. It's genius. It's absurd. It's so Odysseus. Except he can't help bragging. He yells his real name as they sail away. Polyphemus, bleeding and furious, shouts to the heavens. And Poseidon, oh Poseidon, hears. Now, fringe fact. Some ancient scholars believe the name Odysseus comes from the Greek word for hate or wrath. Fitting, since every god he meets from here on seems to hold a personal grudge. Hera doesn't intervene, but she doesn't stop Poseidon either. That's the trick with her, she rarely acts. She permits. She lets others do the work, then edits the results like a divine producer with final cut. Odysseus is flung to Aeolia next, where the wind god gives him a bag of winds. Great gift, right? Except his crew, thinking it's treasure, opens it while he's asleep. Back to square one. You sigh. He sighs. Hera. Chuckles, probably. They reach the Lystrygonians, giant cannibals, who crush ships like soda cans. Only one vessel escapes. Odysseus is now down to a skeleton crew. And next Circe. Ah, Circe. Witch of Aiaia. She turns his men into pigs, literal pigs, until Hermes steps in with an herbal counterspell. Odysseus confronts her sword in hand, and they negotiate. Depending on who you ask, that negotiation lasts a year. Historians still debate whether Circe is a cautionary tale, a goddess in disguise, or just a very persuasive life coach with an herb garden. Eventually, Odysseus leaves. Because Hera isn't done. Down to the underworld he goes to ask the prophet Tiresias how to get home. You tag along. It's cold, and the dead whisper your name even though you didn't give it. Tiresias tells Odysseus he'll make it back if he doesn't mess up. Spoiler. He'll mess up. Back above, it's trial after trial. Sirens sing. Odysseus ties himself to the mast. Scylla and Charybdis loom, one a many-headed sea monster, the other a whirlpool. He picks Scylla, loses men, keeps going. And then comes the island of the sun god, where his crew, starving, eats sacred cows. Hera doesn't even need to intervene at this point. The divine retribution is basically on autopilot. Zeus strikes their ship with a lightning bolt. Odysseus alone survives. He washes up on the island of Calypso, who keeps him for 7 years. 7 years. Depending on the telling, she loves him, or she owns him, or both. Fringe scholars argue whether Calypso was a punishment or a reward, freedom from war, from aging from Hera. But Odysseus weeps on the shore every morning. Even paradise feels like a trap when it isn't home. Eventually, the gods tell Calypso to let him go. But guess who doesn't help you know who? Hera. Because Odysseus is clever, and clever men are rarely grateful. Hera knows this. She lets Poseidon chase him across the sea one last time before Athena finally steps in. He washes up in Phaeacia, tells his tale, and is finally sent home. He arrives in Ithaca, a beggar. Disguised, unknown. It's been 20 years, and Hera, watching, folds her arms. Because sometimes punishment isn't death or fire. Sometimes it's coming home to find your dog older, your bed colder, and everything you fought for so far gone. It feels like someone else's dream. Section 11. You stand beside Odysseus, now cloaked in rags, his beard unkempt and eyes sharp beneath the weight of 20 years. His homeland Ithaca stretches before him like a mirage, familiar hills, olive trees, the scent of sea-salted air. But nothing feels quite right. Home isn't what it used to be. That's the thing Hera understands better than most. Time erodes memory, and revenge, even if delayed, does its best work in silence. Odysseus has returned, yes, but the gods have made sure his homecoming isn't a warm bath and a hot stew. Let's take stock. He's got a palace full of suitors eating his food, insulting his name, and trying to marry his wife. His son Telemachus is just old enough to resent having grown up without him. And Penelope, wise, patient. Penelope has spent 2 decades weaving and unweaving hope, one thread at a time. And now he has to sneak in like a thief. You follow as Athena disguises him, not Hera. Hera's watching from a distance, arms crossed. This isn't her domain anymore, but it is the aftermath of what she set in motion, like walking through smoke long after the fire's gone out. He meets Telemachus in secret. Father and son face to face, neither knowing quite what to say. There's no grand hug, no emotional montage. Just quiet recognition, a mutual understanding of what needs to happen next. They plot. Penelope, meanwhile, is holding her own. Here's your historical fact. Ancient Greek ideals placed women in a very restricted role, yet Penelope was often held up as a paragon, not because she obeyed, but because she outwitted everyone around her. Her famous trick promising to marry once she finishes weaving a funeral shroud, which she secretly unravels each night for 3 years. Now the tension coils. Odysseus, still in disguise, enters his own palace. The suitors mock him. He bides his time. Penelope, unknowingly hosting her long-lost husband, tests him questions about his origins, little traps about her marriage bed that only he would know. And that bed built from a living olive tree. Immovable, symbolic. If Hera were to carve a metaphor into a headboard, this would be it. Eventually, Odysseus reveals himself. The bow is strung, the arrows fly. One by one, the suitors fall. Swift, silent, sudden. Hera doesn't intervene, but she watches. Because here's your fringe tidbit. Some myths suggest Hera disapproved of how Athena handled Odysseus's return, that the slaughter was too personal, too dirty, too human. Others say Hera thought it poetic. As ever, mythology offers several drafts of the same story, none of them fully consistent. Blood stains the stone. Penelope, stunned, slowly accepts it's really him. They speak, they rest, and for a moment Ithaca is still. But Hera knows better, because there's still aftermath to manage. Still feuding families. Still the wrath of those who lost sons to Odysseus's arrows. Athena has to step in again this time to broker peace. And peace, well, it's always fragile. So Hera turns her gaze elsewhere. Because even if Troy is ash and Odysseus is home, the story isn't really over. Not for her, not for the gods. There's another thread still dangling, a legacy left behind in the embers. You know the one. Aeneas, the Trojan prince who escaped, the one Hera didn't catch, and she hates that. Here's where myth bleeds into Roman history just a little. According to later legends, especially the ones the Romans loved, Aeneas survives the fall of Troy, carrying his elderly father on his back and holding his son by the hand. It's the stuff of epic murals and state propaganda. And Hera, she's furious. Because Aeneas doesn't just survive. He sails, he wanders, and eventually he's fated to found something greater than Troy ever was Rome. Rome, which would eclipse even Greece. Rome, which would name its chief goddess Juno Hera's Roman persona, and then saddle her with centuries of grudges and resentment over this one escapee. So now Hera's back in the game. Aeneas is on the sea. Hera's stalking the edges of his story, whispering into storms and tossing in monsters like she's reordering a bad menu. She delays him at every port. She flings him into the arms of Dido, Queen of Carthage, hoping romance will root him down and kill the prophecy. But it doesn't stick, because destiny apparently is waterproof. Still, the roots of that hatred matter. That's your scholarly debate tonight, whether the rivalry between Hera and Aeneas is a late invention added by the Romans to justify their power, or if it truly traces back to Greek whispers about a boy who got away. You drift above his ship now, stars reflected in the wine-dark sea. Hera is circling like a hawk with too many feathers out of place. She can't stop the founding of Rome, but she'll make it hurt. That's what she's good at. That's what this myth has always been about. Not just a bribe, not just a beauty contest, but the long, slow fallout of divine pride and mortal decisions. Aeneas doesn't know it yet, but his children's children will found a city, and that city will write new stories, and those stories will repaint Hera in colder colors, because history is written by the victors, and Hera, she's still waiting for her turn. Section 12. You drift now over dark waves following a slim trail of starlight, as Aeneas sails westward, tugged forward by destiny, trailed by disaster. Hera is quiet, but don't mistake that for retreat. She's merely recalibrating. Because this isn't just a grudge, it's a cosmic chess match, and she's still playing 5 moves ahead. You're with Aeneas on his creaking ship, which groans like it knows it's caught between worlds. Behind him lies smouldering Troy, and before him a prophecy thick with vague metaphors and absolutely no travel tips. Every stop is a trap. Every harbor hides something with teeth. Take Carthage, for example. He arrives half-drowned, dragging a fleet barely held together with hope and rope. Queen Dido takes him in. She's brilliant, proud, and according to some tellings, cursed by Venus Aeneas's divine mother to fall in love with him. No pressure. They grow close. Share firelit dinners. Take long walks along the shore. Dido sees a partner. Aeneas sees a pause button. But Hera, she sees an opportunity. She fans the flames of this romance, whispering sweet distractions. Maybe this time prophecy will bend. Maybe Aeneas will stay. But he doesn't. One morning he just leaves. No goodbye, no closure. Just a ship vanishing into the mist, while Dido climbs a pyre of everything she thought she had. Now for your historical fact, Carthage was a real city founded in the 9th century BCE in what's now Tunisia. Later, it became Rome's greatest rival in the Punic Wars. So when the Romans wrote Aeneas's story in the Aeneid, they included Dido as a tragic ancestor to justify centuries of enmity. Myth and history merged messily. Fringe scholars suggest Dido's myth was altered over time, with older versions painting her more as a sovereign queen than a heartbroken footnote. Hera in this light becomes more than a meddler, she's the patron of sovereignty spurned. Still, Aeneas sails on, and Hera, she simmers. She tosses storms across his path, hires harpies to harass his men mid-meal, and whispers poison into the ears of petty kings who block his journey like level bosses in an underfunded RPG. At one point, Aeneas visits the Sibyl of Cumae, a prophetess who guides him to the underworld. There he walks the shadowed halls of memory and fate, witnessing both his past and Rome's shimmering future. It's an intense sequence, golden boughs, rivers of fire, ghostly fathers offering cryptic advice, and you kind of wish he'd taken notes. But the point is, this destiny doesn't ask permission. He emerges changed, hardened. Hera watches him with narrowed eyes. He finally lands in Latium modern-day Italy, and here's where the myth gets tangled in real-world roots. According to legend, the locals are less than thrilled to see him, especially Turnus, prince of the Rutulians, who was promised the local princess Lavinia before Aeneas waltzed in with his glowing aura and awkward baggage. Cue the war. Now this is the part where Hera leans in again. She sides with Turnus not because she loves him, but because he's convenient. She arms him, fires him up, stirs old alliances like she's mixing an ancient cocktail of vengeance. The battles rage. Aeneas builds a city, then loses it, then builds again. At one point his ships are nearly burned, but here's your fringe tidbit. The goddess Cybele transforms them into sea nymphs to protect them. Some say Hera let it happen. Others think she rolled her eyes so hard it caused a minor tremor in the Alps, but Hera still fights the prophecy, even now. Historians still argue whether Aeneas was meant to be a bridge between Troy and Rome, or if the story was retconned by Rome itself to lend divine legitimacy to empire building. Either way, Hera becomes a kind of narrative foil, the one who says no even when the script says yes. The final showdown arrives. Aeneas duels Turnus in single combat. It's a tense, brutal thing. Spear against spear, honor against grudge. Hera, watching, sees Turnus falter. He's doomed. She intervenes one last time. She begs Jupiter to spare him, and here's where something strange happens. Jupiter listens. He agrees, but only if Turnus accepts the coming world, the Roman world. Hera consents grudgingly. On one condition, the Trojans must abandon their name and customs, merging entirely with the Latin people. No more Troy, no more reminders, just Rome. It's petty, it's powerful, it's so Hera. And so Aeneas kills Turnus. The war ends. The foundations of Rome are laid not with joy, but with the thick silence that follows every epic conclusion. You hover above the newborn city, watching children play in dust that still remembers fire. Statues will rise, wars will come, myths will be rewritten to suit every emperor's ego. And Hera, she recedes just a little, because the game has changed. She lost the round, but not the war. Section 13. You linger now in that quiet after-battle hush, the air still thick with stories that haven't been told yet. Rome, barely a village, pulses with the promise of empires. And Hera, yes, even now, isn't done. She's quiet, sure, but not still. You can feel her like a held breath, watching, adjusting her grip on the narrative. Aeneas has fulfilled his prophecy. Mostly. He's married, Lavinia secured a kingdom, and his descendants will do the rest. But if you expected a happily ever after, I regret to inform you ancient myths are much more into to be continued. The spotlight shifts now to the generations that come after. Rome, as it grows, finds more ways to fold its own importance into these old Greek myths, like adding extra pages to a family scrapbook that wasn't originally theirs. And Hera, she doesn't fade into the background. She evolves. Here's your historical fact. As the Romans absorbed Greek culture, they merged their deities with Greek ones, a process called interpretatio Graeca. Zeus became Jupiter, Athena became Minerva, and Hera, well, she became Juno. Not just goddess of marriage anymore. She was now protector of the Roman state, guardian of moral order, and no surprise here, still absolutely not a fan of the Trojans. Especially not the Julian family. You know the ones. Julius Caesar, Augustus. They claimed descent from Aeneas, which means every coin, every statue, every self-glorifying speech that tied Roman greatness to Trojan survival rubbed Hera's face right in it. Now, your fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe this is why Hera's Roman counterpart Juno was portrayed as both maternal and warlike. A weird combo. Sure, but perfectly in line with a goddess who loved hard-hated harder and had a spreadsheet of revenge goals color-coded by century. Meanwhile, myths continue to tangle themselves into knots. Take Romulus and Remus, for instance, twin sons of Mars, the Roman version of Ares, and a Vestal virgin. They're abandoned, suckled by a she-wolf, yes, that happened, and eventually found Rome. One kills the other, as you do. And Hera, Juno is there in spirit, not as a guiding hand, but as a shadow across the cradle. Because this Rome is the thing she couldn't prevent, her failure carved into marble. So what does she do? She adapts. In Rome, she becomes the queen of the gods in a more formal, bureaucratic way. Less thunderclap, more Senate-approved titles. She's given temples, priests, festivals. She's worshipped as Juno Regina, Juno the Queen. She's honored as the guardian of women of the state of sacred contracts. But behind the incense and ceremony, there's still that undercurrent of grudge. You walk through one of her Roman temples now. Cool marble. Votive offerings tucked into corners. Echoes of prayers from people who have no idea that their goddess once torched cities over a beauty contest. A woman kneels asking for protection in childbirth, A senator passes by asking for wisdom before a vote, and Hera, Juno listens. But you get the sense that part of her mind is still drifting over the Aegean. Because here's the scholarly debate of the night, whether Juno truly became a separate entity from Hera, or if she's just Hera with better branding. Some argue that the Romans reinterpreted her entirely focusing on her civic duties and softening the divine tantrums. Others say the essence never changed, just the PR campaign. You exit the temple and stand on a Roman street dust rising around your ankles. Children play with carved dice. A merchant haggles. Overhead, the gods are watching, but they've been reduced to statues, inscriptions, and oaths. It's a long way from Troy, but the myth never fully leaves. Even now, you can trace its fingerprints on modern stories. Jealousy, vanity, revenge. The idea that one small personal slight can ripple into centuries of war. Hera's bribe wasn't just a footnote. It was the match, the spark. And if you squint, you can still see the glow, because Hera never got closure. Even as Juno draped in Roman respectability, she carried that grudge like a badge. Aeneas might have survived. Rome might have risen. But Hera made sure they earned it. Every inch, every generation. She became less overt, sure. But that's how grudges age. They settle in. They become tradition. They lace themselves through rituals until nobody remembers why they started, but everyone still follows the rules. And you're still here, drifting through centuries, lulled by the low hum of myth woven into daily life. You pass a stone wall and etched, there is a scene, 3 goddesses. One mortal man, a golden apple. It all comes back to that one moment, that one choice. Paris, a shepherd with terrible judgment, and Hera with a bribe that didn't land. Or did it, because in a strange, twisted way, she won. Her rival Troy is gone. Her influence shaped empires. Her name lives on, carved into the bones of cities that thought they left her behind. The myth doesn't end. It loops. And somewhere Hera still watches. You move now through time like drifting mists slipping past emperors and olive groves into quieter chapters of myth where Hera's name is less shouted and more whispered. The fires of Troy are long cooled, and even Rome in its imperial swagger begins to crack under its own grandeur. But Hera remains in the margins, sharp as ever, lingering like a stubborn perfume in a room no one remembers walking into. The story isn't really about her anymore. Not officially, but unofficially. Oh, she's everywhere. You stand beneath the vaulted ceiling of a Roman villa. Mosaics glitter. One depicts the judgment of Paris, the apple still mid-air, frozen in its arc, like the world is holding its breath. In the background, Hera stands stiff and dignified gaze, hard enough to flake paint. She's become symbolic now. Let's pause for your historical fact by the late Roman Empire. Hera Juno was often depicted in art and literature more as a moral symbol than an active deity. She was matronly, the eternal wife, the divine figure of fidelity and national identity. In short, she went corporate. But don't be fooled. You spot her again later in an obscure festival, the Matronalia celebrated in March by Roman women. Flowers, prayers, gifts to mothers and wives. It sounds cozy, but lurking behind it is Hera's old sharpness. The message was always clear. Loyalty is divine, and marriage is a battlefield. Which brings us to your quirky tidbit. There's evidence that Roman brides would invoke Juno's name as part of pre-wedding rites, asking for strength, fertility, and patience. Ancient footnotes suggest some even feared invoking her too strongly, lest their marriages turn out too much like hers. You know, eternal, yes, but not exactly serene. The myths now start to shift tone like bedtime stories being re-edited for kids. Hera doesn't hurl storms anymore. She's stern. She's not petty. She's principled. You know that trick where your mum says, "We don't raise our voices while raising hers." Hera basically invented that. But you sense something deeper. A low hum beneath the neat columns and clean translations. She's not mellowed. She's waiting. Because myths don't die, they molt. and as Christianity rises in Rome, the gods start to fade. One by one, temples are emptied, statues are repurposed, festivals are renamed or quietly cancelled, and the deities, they slip out of calendars and into metaphors. But Hera, she endures, in disguise maybe, in softened form. You hear her in the medieval idea of the jealous queen, in folk tales where stepmothers punish golden-haired girls, in phrases like "hell hath no fury," which isn't a quote from mythology, but feels like it could be. Here's tonight's scholarly debate. Was Hera a victim of character assassination? Some modern scholars argue that early storytellers, mainly male poets, deliberately cast her as difficult to make Zeus's wandering eye more palatable, like turning the wronged party into the villain just to keep the family reunion less awkward. It raises a question: if Hera had told her own story, how different would it sound? You follow her now through darkened libraries and half-cracked scrolls. Her voice isn't gone, it's just quieter, tangled in footnotes, waiting for someone to read between the lines. You wonder what it must have felt like being turned from a living force of nature into a cautionary tale, from goddess to emblem, from thunder to whisper. And yet, she's never irrelevant. Because every time someone tells a story where pride collides with fate, or a promise is broken for the sake of ambition, or a woman holds power and pays the price for it, Hera nods knowingly from the wings. You pass a modern museum now. Neon lights buzz faintly. Inside a replica of the judgment scene stands roped off and carefully labelled, "Paris awards the apple." A plaque explains the myth. It reads like a summary of a soap opera. But you know better. You've seen the fallout. You've walked through burning cities and haunted coastlines. That golden apple wasn't just a symbol, it was a fulcrum, a tiny weight that tipped history on its side. And Hera. She's still holding a copy of the script, reading everyone else's lines with a red pen. By now, you can feel the rhythm of her myth changing. It's not as loud, not as fiery, but there's endurance in the way she lingers. Not in explosions, but in the cracks they leave behind. You step outside. The stars are different now, older, or maybe just more honest. A breeze moves past you, the kind that feels like someone breathing on your neck. Hera, maybe, or just memory dressed in her shape. Either way, you keep walking, because the story, even in its quieter parts, still pulls you forward. Section 15. The road grows quieter now, edged with mist and memory. The myths worn smoother, like river stones turned over too many times. You're not in ancient Greece or imperial Rome anymore. You're in the strange in-between, where the old gods begin to blur into archetypes and echo inside new stories without their names attached. And Hera. She's still here, but now she's hidden in plain sight. You wander into a Renaissance study scrolls replaced by books, mythologies being dusted off and rewritten with careful Latin and even more careful morality. Hera becomes Juno again, always Juno in this era, and the scholars nod respectfully toward her virtues while silently edging away from her anger. Now for your historical fact. During the Renaissance, classical myths were revived as educational tools. Artists like Botticelli, Rubens, and Raphael painted the gods not just for beauty, but as subtle moral lessons. Juno shows up a lot, robed majestic sometimes, frowning at Jupiter's escapades, but always posed just so. You can practically hear her teeth grinding beneath the gold leaf. One fringe tidbit. In several Renaissance paintings, Hera, Juno, appears with a peacock, but instead of symbolizing pride, as modern viewers often assume it originally symbolized watchfulness. According to myth, she placed the 100 eyes of Argus, the poor guy she'd tasked with spying on Zeus, into the bird's feathers after his tragic demise. So yes, every time you see a preening peacock in a palace mural, it might be Hera's version of saying, "I told you I was watching." But in these interpretations, she's rarely active anymore. She's a statue, a painting, a morale. You reach out in your mind to touch one of those canvases, a cool brushstroke across her cheek, and you imagine she flinches slightly, unused to gentleness. Artists loved her form, but often misunderstood her fire. They painted the glare, but not the grit. Still, she endures, because she always does. Here's where things get interesting. Scholars still argue whether Renaissance thinkers truly understood the depth of Greek mythology or just cherry-picked parts that supported their own humanist ideals. Was Hera studied for who she was or for who she could be reframed as queenly, dutiful, regal, but rarely raw? You picture her rolling her eyes somewhere in the background, surrounded by powdered wigs and Latin declensions. But outside those salons and candlelit libraries, Hera finds new life in unexpected places. Folk tales, superstitions, theatre. You peek into an Elizabethan stage production, maybe Shakespearean, maybe not. A strong, noble queen rails against betrayal. Her power is majestic, but her fury, suspiciously familiar. The playwright doesn't name her Hera, but you feel her there in the lines, in the layered grief, in the fire behind every well-mannered sentence. And suddenly Hera's not a goddess anymore. She's a template, a vibe, the embodiment of "I will remember this insult forever." She appears in fairy tales now too, not always in flattering roles. The jealous queen, the vengeful stepmother, the regal woman whose kindness has been stripped in favor of cautionary sharpness. You've heard her voice in grim stories where vanity ends in curses and banishment, but you've also seen her strength buried underneath. Sometimes she's just a woman trying to hold together something that's constantly being taken from her. And maybe people start to relate, because Hera's never been easy, but she has always been real. Even now, she shows up in modern pop culture, films, novels, comics. Not always by name, but in essence. Powerful, proud women sometimes unfairly cast as antagonists who carry the weight of impossible standards and still don't break. Or maybe they do break, but in elegant, explosive ways that make you whisper, "Oh no" and "yes" at the same time. Think about every villainess who had a point. Think about every queen who wasn't allowed to be angry without losing her crown. Think about how we tell women to be strong but punish them for showing it too loudly. That's Hera. Still here, still judging, still holding a grudge, but by now it's evolved. It's not just about Paris and that dumb apple. It's about legacy, reputation, how myths twist, and how they get retold again and again with the same gods wearing slightly different masks. You step into a bookstore, now one of those cozy, slightly dusty ones with bent spines and mismatched shelves. In the mythology section, a well-worn copy of Edith Hamilton's Mythology leans against a newer volume, Women and Power in the Classical World. Hera gets a chapter in both. The first calls her jealous. The second calls her justifiably outraged. It's a small shift in wording, but a seismic shift in meaning. And that's where the scholarly debate opens again. Some argue modern reinterpretations go too far in defending Hera, flattening her nuance into girl boss tropes. Others say it's long overdue, she's finally getting her due. The truth. Probably somewhere in the middle. Somewhere complicated. Somewhere that feels more like a person than a painting. You step back into the night, the stars above, like old stories pinned to velvet. Hera isn't glaring anymore. She's waiting. Maybe even curious. Because she knows better than anyone that being remembered is its own kind of power. And her myth still remembered, still evolving, still hers. Section 16. And just like that, you slip into the modern era. Your shoes are a little more comfortable now. Your references a little more Netflix than Neolithic. Hera follows you in trailing behind, with impeccable posture. Her hair unruffled, her expression permanently unimpressed by skyscrapers and smartphones. She's made it to the present somehow, still royal, still mythic, still kind of mad. You find her now in classrooms and Twitter threads, documentaries and Tumblr fan edits. Some of them paint her as misunderstood, others still call her vindictive. But she's talked about, which, for a goddess who once lived on fear and ambrosia, is kind of the next best thing. Let's start with your historical fact. Hera's modern rebranding began in earnest during the 20th century's feminist movements, when scholars and artists began re-evaluating classical female figures through a more sympathetic lens. Suddenly, Hera wasn't just Zeus's furious wife. She was the goddess of boundaries, of not tolerating disloyalty, of knowing her worth even when the stories didn't treat her kindly. Sure, the myths still stand. She still tried to kill Hercules as a baby, still sent snakes, still raged against every child born to someone else's womb. But now we read between the lines more carefully. Was it cruelty or desperation? Control or a reaction to being constantly sidelined? Scholars now argue that Hera is mythology's most gaslit figure. And here's your quirky tidbit. There's a niche corner of the internet where Hera is viewed as the ultimate patron saint of boundaries. People write prayers to her not for vengeance but for strength in breakups, in marriages, in saying no. What would Hera do appears under candlelit altars in suburban bedrooms. And honestly, that tracks. You keep walking your path, lined now with streetlights and streaming playlists. Hera's in TV shows. She shows up in fantasy dramas and animated reboots. Sometimes regal, sometimes monstrous, but always powerful. You notice how the writers love giving her long monologues. She's always in control of the room. And when she exits, people remember her. But remember, myths evolve by being retold, not just remembered. And that's where Hera thrives. You overhear someone in a college lecture hall quoting her. She's the goddess of marriage, the professor says, but she's also the goddess of reaction. You smile at that. It's oddly poetic. Because marriage in myth and in life is all about reaction, expectations, disappointments, the impossible dance between control and chaos. Hera knows that better than anyone. Here's your scholarly debate. Is it even fair to judge Hera through a modern lens? Some argue that giving ancient goddesses feminist makeovers does more harm than good, that it erases their original cultural contexts. Others say mythology demands reinterpretation, that these stories were always meant to be mirrors for their time, and our time deserves its own reflections. You walk past a billboard now. A fashion brand has launched a divine femininity line. One of the models wears a golden headband and a white silk gown captioned, "Channel your inner Hera." Bold choice for a goddess known for burning cities and cursing lovers. But hey, it's catchy. Meanwhile, the peacock makes a comeback. Jewelry, tattoos. That feather pattern finds its way into everything from smartphone cases to cafe logos. Most people just think it's pretty. You remember the eyes, the watchfulness, Argus, the eternal witness. The myths in the background now, like an old soundtrack remixed with bass and reverb, but it's still there. And Hera. She hasn't softened so much as adjusted. She doesn't need temples anymore. She's in your metaphors, your pop culture, your occasional life advice memes. Because if there's one thing she's mastered, it's adaptation. She doesn't stomp around demanding reverence. She lets you come to her. Maybe after a breakup. Maybe after realizing a work relationship is toxic. Maybe while rage cleaning your apartment at midnight. She's not here to coddle. She's here to help you hold the line. You glance at your phone, and somewhere beneath the notifications and calendar alerts, you feel that ancient presence. Hera doesn't need to shout. She just needs to be remembered. And you do. Even as you cross the invisible line between old myth and daily life. She's in your stories, your roles, your boundaries. Not a villain, not a saint, just Hera. Still here. Section 17. You take a breath, letting modern noise fade like elevator music on a closed floor. The stories have caught up with you, now looped, remixed, softened in some places, and sharpened in others. But Hera, ever the queen, still has one more form to slip into the subconscious. The myth beneath the myth. The echo of what she once was and what she might still become. Because the truth is, she never really needed temples or marble columns. Hera's empire was always psychological. She's not just a character anymore. She's an archetype. She lives in the collective headspace of humanity, especially the parts that deal with power pride, and the very specific art of keeping everything from falling apart while looking like you meant to all along. Let's ground that with your historical fact. The psychologist Carl Jung viewed figures like Hera as archetypal patterns in the human psyche, recurring personas that symbolize universal human experiences. Hera in this framework represents the queen archetype, dignity, devotion, the will to lead, but also jealousy, rigidity, the danger of identifying too much with your title, your relationship, your role, which is ironically very Hera. Now for your quirky tidbit in one of the stranger twists of modern mythology, Hera is sometimes included tongue-in-cheek in contemporary astrology apps as a minor goddess influence. She supposedly governs loyalty, long-term commitments, and relationship boundaries. One app even suggests lighting a candle for her on Wednesdays for clarity in conflict, as if Hera ever needed a candle to know someone was lying. You chuckle a little at that, but also you kind of get it, because even if you don't believe in gods, you do believe in patterns, in personalities, in feelings that cycle back around with ancient rhythm. Hera is less a being now than a lens, a way of understanding why certain relationships feel so fraught, so weighty, so cosmic. That quiet rage when you give everything and still get the short end. That's Hera. That moment when you realize your loyalty isn't being matched. Also Hera. That deep, slow breath before you walk into a room where you'll have to be regal, composed, and just slightly terrifying. That's peak Hera energy. And scholars debate this too, whether Hera's archetype helps or harms modern discussions of femininity. Some argue she reinforces outdated stereotypes of the bitter wife. Others say she opens a door to talking honestly about betrayal, about power in intimacy, about emotional endurance. You keep walking now through a more dreamlike space. The streets are melting into clouds. Buildings curve like they're made of memory, not stone. You're no longer on any map. You're inside a metaphor now, and Hera's here too. Not to scold, not even to judge. She's just watching the way she always does, like the 100-eyed peacock, like a woman who's seen every version of this story before and knows it always comes down to choice. That's the thing people forget. Hera had choices. She didn't have to stay married to Zeus, not by immortal standards. But she chose to stay, for the throne, for stability, for pride. Historians still argue whether Hera was a prisoner of patriarchy or a player of the game who knew exactly what staying meant and stayed anyway. It's messy, but myth always is. And you realize as you float further into this airy, symbolic dreamscape that Hera isn't a fixed point anymore. She's a constellation of ideas. She's every woman who's ever held a family together with sheer willpower, every partner who's felt overshadowed, every leader who had to endure slander just to keep the structure from collapsing. You hear her voice now, not loud, not angry, just firm. You think this is about a golden apple. She laughs, not bitterly, not coldly, just knowingly. That was just the excuse. And there it is. The truth tucked under 1,000 retellings. It was never about the apple, or the shepherd, or even the beauty contest. It was about power, about what happens when you're told you're not enough, even by those who owe you everything. So she stayed, not because she was weak, but because she knew the story wasn't done, and you're still in it, still walking it, still feeling your way through power and pride and pain and whatever version of loyalty fits into this life of yours. Hera's not behind you anymore. She's beside you now, watching, waiting, nodding quietly when you get it right. Section 18. The road ahead is quieter now. You don't hear the clatter of myth or the roar of gods anymore, just the hush of your own footsteps in some vast in-between space. Hera walks with you, but she doesn't say much. Her eyes do enough. They flick toward each new shape, each whisper of meaning that hangs in the air like soft mist. You've left the world of written stories, temples and golden bribes. You've wandered into something more abstract, the afterlife of a myth. Here comes your historical fact. In the 21st century, mythology has seen a boom in retellings, not just in academic works, but in popular fiction, where authors reinterpret the classics through modern voices. From novels like Circe by Madeline Miller to feminist takes on Eurydice. Hera is showing up again, not always center stage, but always in the wings, watching, waiting for her cue. In many of these retellings, she's still complex, still flawed, but finally allowed to speak. And here's your fringe fact. For the night, there's a growing community of devotional polytheists in online spaces who engage with the Greek pantheon not just as myth, but as living tradition. Some claim to feel Hera's presence in dreams or in moments of decisive clarity. One writer described her as the patron goddess of breaking generational curses. Honestly, it sounds like exactly the kind of job Hera would give herself. You walk through a field now, wide silent with tall grasses brushing your arms. It feels like the world after the end of the story, like the place where myths go when they're done being argued over and just want to sit down for a minute. And Hera. She finally sits too. She doesn't collapse. She perches like someone who's been standing too long at a party where everyone keeps mispronouncing her name. She's had her fill of being the jealous one, of being edited into a caricature. She's here now as something truer, a survivor of her own narrative. You sit beside her. It's not awkward, not ceremonial, just quiet. She tells you without words that myths never die. They just molt. They shed the parts that no longer fit. And you realize, maybe for the first time, that Hera was never asking to be adored, only understood. That's the twist, isn't it? The one the myths don't tell you. She never wanted to be feared. She wanted to be seen. For more than her crown. For more than her husband. For more than her rage. And maybe you've finally done that. Here's where scholars keep poking. Is there a definitive Hera? Or is she like the moon showing a different face depending on where you stand? Some say yes, there's a core to her loyalty, dignity, ferocity. Others argue she's all performance, all shifting context, a mirror held up to different centuries. You look at her again. She's both. And she knows it. So you walk a little farther, and the scenery keeps shifting. It's less like traveling, more like unraveling. The old narratives are falling away behind you like used-up scaffolding. No more apples, no more contests, no more Paris on his rock pretending this isn't all his fault. You glance back once just to check. The hill where he made his choice is still there, but it's smaller now, less significant, just a bump on the horizon. And Hera doesn't look back at all, because she never needed to win the prize. She already knew what she was worth. You cross a stream. The water is cool on your toes. Maybe metaphor, maybe memory. Hera glides across beside you, not looking down. She doesn't have to. The wind picks up, brushing against your cheeks like the first sigh of sleep. The grass leans in to listen. And Hera finally lets the weight of centuries drop from her shoulders. Not all of it, just enough. And in that moment, she's not the goddess of marriage. She's not the queen of Olympus. She's just Hera, the one who stayed, the one who endured, the one who, despite everything, is still here. You walk on, she walks with you, and together you step gently into the hush that comes before the dream. Section 19. The dream deepens now. You feel it in your limbs, heavier, softer, quieter, like you're sinking not downward, but inward, into some calm, glowing space inside the story where Hera no longer needs to play a part. The performance is done. The audience has gone home, and she finally can just be. You're still with her, still trailing her steps, or maybe walking beside her. It's hard to tell anymore. Time is bending. The air feels thicker, like velvet or warm tea. Your thoughts slow each one, stretching into the next, like they're all holding hands. So let's look back gently now. You remember the apple, the goddesses, the bribes, the shepherd with way too much power and absolutely no strategic thinking. You remember Hera offering land rights, the promise of real, tangible control. Not just love or beauty, but something you could hold in your hands and govern. Something that lasted. And still, Paris chose otherwise. Your historical fact tonight, the myth of the judgment of Paris with Hera's rejected offer, was often used in ancient Greek theatre and poetry as shorthand for bad decision-making. A lot of ancient thinkers looked at that moment and just shook their heads. It wasn't even about who was more beautiful. It was about Paris misunderstanding value. He chose the flash, not the future. And that miscalculation shaped the fall of Troy. But here's your quirky tidbit in a rare fragment of ancient comedy, possibly from a now-lost play by Epicharmus Paris, is mocked for turning down Hera's land deal with the line he passed up power to chase perfume. That's the ancient version of he fumbled the bag. Even then, people knew it was a ridiculous choice. So here you are, walking the edges of what remains. Hera doesn't mention it. She doesn't need to. The world chose its path, and she walked hers. And you, somewhere between myth and midnight, are realizing something. She was never really offering a kingdom. She was offering sovereignty. Not land, not cities, but the right to rule your own story. To say, this is mine. These are my boundaries. This is how I'll be remembered, not as someone who begged for affection, but as someone who commanded space. That's what Paris said no to, and maybe that's why he lost everything. There's a debate, of course there is, among modern classicists. Some say Hera's bribe was disingenuous, just another power grab dressed as diplomacy. Others believe it was the most practical offer of the three, a deal that looked boring on the surface, but contained real transformative power. Historians still argue whether Paris knew what he was passing up, or if, like so many before and after him, he simply couldn't see past the shimmer of desire. And here you are at the quiet end of that thread. Hera doesn't say, "I told you so." She just lifts her gaze to the horizon where dawn or something like it begins to glow. Her face is unreadable. But you know what she's thinking. It was never about winning. It was about offering something real. You ask yourself now, softly, sleepily, what would you have chosen, the golden apple? The promise of being loved by everyone, or the boring, sturdy, lasting power to shape your future? And as you drift between the answers, you realize Hera's still offering it, even now. You can say yes if you want. Not to her, not to Olympus, but to yourself, to the quiet claim of your own worth, to the knowledge that you do not need to be chosen to be powerful, that sometimes being passed over is the first step toward remembering who you are, and that maybe Paris's rejection was Hera's release, because when no one picks you, you're finally free to pick yourself. Section 20. It's late now, or early, depending on how you look at it. The world of the myth is softening around the edges, and Hera, your quiet, complex companion, feels less like a figure and more like a feeling. That steady, unswerving part of you that holds things together even when the sky's doing its best impression of a falling piano. You walk slower, so does she. There's nothing left to rush toward. No apple, no verdict, no throne to protect, no Olympian drama to perform. Just the long, quiet space after a myth has run its course. It feels like twilight stretched out over a mountaintop. Cold stars above, warm earth underfoot. Peace for once. You glance over at her, and maybe for the first time tonight she looks almost amused, because you've been following this whole tangled web, apples and bribes and marriages and betrayals, and you've made it to the end, or at least a place that feels like one. And somehow she's still here, still regal, still Hera. That's the final twist she doesn't get erased. She never did. Here's your final historical fact. In late Roman times, as Christianity began overtaking the old pantheon, many goddesses like Demeter, Aphrodite, even Athena faded into the cultural background. But Hera held on longer than most. In some local traditions, she was quietly folded into stories about saintly women or divine mothers. In Sicily, a few rural festivals even continued under her name well into the medieval era, long after the official statues were toppled. You don't forget a queen that easily. And for your last quirky tidbit, in modern times, a crater on the moon is named after Hera. It's tiny, barely noticeable on lunar maps, but it's there, still watching from above, still quietly present, like the whisper of a myth in the back of your head. Scholars still argue whether she deserves rehabilitation. Some say she was too vengeful, too jealous, too stitched to her role as wife of Zeus. Others argue that's exactly why she matters, because she carried it all and kept standing, because her flaws were survival strategies in a divine world where even immortals got burned. And maybe she's not asking for redemption. She's asking for recognition, not as a goddess, but as a pattern, a presence, a truth. That power doesn't always look like lightning bolts. Sometimes it looks like saying, "I'm not going anywhere." Sometimes it looks like staying even when everyone else runs. You and Hera walk a little further, not toward anything, just forward. She turns to you just once and offers a smile. Not warm, not cold, just real. The kind of smile that says, "I see you." And maybe that's the only benediction you need. Because now you know the myths never asked you to believe. They asked you to feel, to let their truth slink in sideways through dreams and symbols and that weird part of your brain that still thinks in poetry when no one's watching. So you feel it now. The story letting go of you, like a hand releasing yours at the end of a long shared walk. You're not in the myth anymore. You're just you. And Hera, she's fading now, not disappearing, just stepping back, letting you take the stage of your own life, letting you write the next lines. You watch her go not with sadness, but with that deep, quiet awe you feel when someone leaves a room but somehow stays in it. Because she will, in memory, in metaphor, in every choice you make to stand your ground, to honor your voice, to endure with elegance. Hera never really needed to win the contest. She only needed to remind you that there's more than one way to be divine. And now, it's time to let the last traces of Olympus melt into the stillness around you. The drama is over. The gods have fallen quiet. Even the golden apple has rolled out of sight, tucked back into the folds of story where it belongs. You're here in your own soft space, a room cooled by breath, warmed by presence. Nothing is chasing you. Nothing needs to be fixed. Everything important has already happened. The grass beneath your feet has turned to clouds. The clouds have turned to nothing at all. You're floating now, held gently by the rhythm of your breath, the slow exhale, the slow drift. And Hera, just a trace of her lingers in your chest like a hum, not commanding, not correcting, just existing. You feel her patience. You feel your own. The stars above blink slower now. The air wraps around you like silk. There's no more story to chase, no moral to extract, just the quiet satisfaction of having traveled all the way through something ancient and made it to the other side. You're not a hero. You're not a villain. You're something simpler, someone resting, someone safe. So let your thoughts grow softer now. Let the last images float past like dream leaves on a still pond. A peacock feather, a hilltop, an apple untouched, a queen unbothered. Breathe in and out, and in again just enough to remind your body it's here. Then let it all go. Let everything fade. Let sleep take the throne now. Sweet dreams.